DiJonai Carrington is looking around the room like, oh my God, I've never been in this much fire. I mean, it's getting so bad that now her endorsements are potentially about to pull out on representing DiJonai Carrington.
This just goes to show that DiJonai has no self-awareness in what's going on. DiJonai Carrington runs on threads immediately. White privilege at Indiana Fever. White privilege. You running around with blonde hair, it looked like you trying to be white. It looked like you trying to be a white girl. What are you talking about, white privilege? The white girl just got a technical foul for something she didn't even do. What are you talking about, white privilege, bro? This is why she should be banned from the league. They always run.
It states here, Reebok is reportedly dropping their endorsement for DiJonai Carrington after she attacked Sophie Cunningham.
DJ Carrington just watched what should have been one bad basketball moment turn into a week that could reshape how people view her entire career. And the craziest part is that most of the damage didn't come from the whistle, the referees, or even the foul itself. It came from what happened afterward. This isn't really a story about officials making one questionable decision, and it isn't simply about the league singling out one player. A physical foul in a heated game could have disappeared after 1 or 2 news cycles. Players get hit, players get tossed, fines get handed out, and everybody eventually moves on. But Carrington somehow took a situation that could have ended there and transformed it into a full-scale reputation problem through a series of decisions she made in the minutes, hours, and days that followed. Instead of allowing the controversy to cool down, nearly every move she made seemed to give it more oxygen. What started as one basketball play quickly became a debate about judgment, race, intent, accountability, sponsors, and whether Carrington understood just how much damage she was creating for herself away from the court.
Did y'all see what happened when this young lady got ejected from a WNBA game the other day for a flagrant foul on Sophie Cunningham? Did y'all see that? She got ejected from the game for that flagrant foul right there, and I'll be damned if that wasn't a flagrant 2. She mugged her. Damn near came across like decapitating her, for crying out loud. That was definitely a hard foul. Make no mistake about it, nobody can argue about it. You can say what you want. We know what we saw. No way around it. The DiJonai Carrington foul was clearly unnecessary. It was a flagrant foul penalty 2. It was absolutely positively correct call. It was called the flagrant 2. That's a flagrant 2 every single damn time in the NBA and the WNBA.
Late in the opening quarter of a nationally televised matchup between the Chicago Sky and Indiana Fever, Sophie Cunningham broke free in transition and appeared headed toward a routine fast break finish. Then Carrington chased the play down from behind and made heavy contact around Cunningham's head and neck area, knocking her hard to the floor. The officials stopped everything and went to the monitor to review what had happened. After looking at the replay, they elevated the call to a flagrant penalty 2, the level used when contact is judged to be both unnecessary and excessive. That meant Carrington's night was immediately over. She was ejected from the game while Cunningham remained at the center of a scene that looked far more serious than an ordinary defensive foul. Cameras followed Carrington as she made her way toward the tunnel, and her expression made it look as though she understood immediately that this wasn't going to disappear once she left the floor. Still, even at that point, the situation was manageable. She could have accepted the ruling, gone to the locker room, allowed the league to handle whatever discipline followed, and let the basketball world argue about the play until the next story arrived. Instead, the controversy was only beginning.
DiJonai Carrington tweeted out white privilege from the locker room of a game that she was playing in. Get this, she fouled Sophie Cunningham hard. Sophie Cunningham, obviously a white person, fouls her hard. Flagrant 2, gets ejected, goes to the locker room and tweets out white privilege in the middle of the game. Now here's the kicker to me. A flagrant 2 has to be contact that can lead to an injury that looks excessive. DiJonai, it was about as excessive as possible. If there was any evidence of there being white privilege, this was not it.
This was the moment when Carrington had a decision to make about how she wanted to respond. And almost immediately, she chose the route that created an entirely new problem. Only minutes after being removed from the game, before the situation had even cooled off, she went on social media and posted the words white privilege, while directly tagging the Fever. There was no explanation attached, no clarification of what she was referring to, and no context telling people how they were supposed to interpret such a loaded phrase. That mattered even more because Cunningham's name had already been pulled into unrelated public debates involving transgender athletes in women's sports, so the post instantly connected Carrington's ejection to a much larger cultural argument whether she intended that connection or not. Then Carrington added another message showing the date of the next Sky Fever matchup, accompanied by a smiling emoji. To a lot of people watching the drama unfold, that didn't look like someone trying to cool down a misunderstanding. It looked like someone intentionally leaning into the tension and teasing another confrontation. In a matter of minutes, she had taken the focus away from the basketball play itself and redirected attention toward her own words.
I would actually say that this is black privilege, to be totally honest with you, because her posting this white racist comment right after assaulting Sophie Cunningham on the court is actually black privilege, because she knows the WNBA won't do a single thing of significance about it. And imagine if the roles were reversed. If Sophie made a comment similar to this, then she'd likely never play again. And actually, we just saw this from Coach Sandy Brondello. She got disciplined for making, I believe, a pretty innocent, maybe, offhand comment about talking about Angel Reese and saying that she's a protected species. She was suspended and disciplined. And I think if that's the standard, then DiJonai should be too.
Just consider how that sequence appeared from the outside. A player gets thrown out after replay officials determine her contact was unnecessary and excessive, and instead of staying quiet until emotions settle, she immediately posts one of the most politically and culturally charged phrases you can use in modern public conversation. It didn't really matter at that moment what she intended to say, because the first impression was already formed. Millions of people saw a player punished for striking another player around the head and neck, followed almost instantly by a message saying white privilege and tagging the opposing organization. For many viewers, the obvious interpretation was that Carrington was suggesting her punishment had something to do with race. Maybe that wasn't her meaning. She would later offer several different explanations about what she intended, but once that original message was public, the interpretation was no longer entirely under her control. An accusation of racial bias, even one people believe is only implied, carries enormous weight. If you're going to introduce something that serious into the conversation, people expect a clear explanation and evidence. Without either one, the post created a controversy much bigger than the foul itself, and every attempt Carrington made afterward to explain it struggled against the first impression she had already created.
I'm just wondering, is this all some sort of bizarre PR strategy to attract eyeballs, or is the WNBA fundamentally broken?
No. That's you, because you're a good person trying to find some kind of rational reason for doing this other than what it is. It's pure and simple racism and hate. They're mad that the best player in the league is a heterosexual white woman. Let's just be honest. She's not one of the confidants in their creed. And so therefore it's been a concentrated effort to go after her. Even her head coach doesn't stand by. So, and I think it's hilarious, and at the same time, they don't know what a woman is. And I'm very proud of Freedom and the other gentlemen for finding out who they are. And I wish them the best. And hopefully the league will, since it's an all tolerant league and their head coaches wear shirts about trans women count. Well, here's two. And I hope they give them their opportunity, and the young lady in France as well. So I think it's a league that has got away with being racist and disgusting to people. And now Americans are smart to it. So hopefully they get some of their own, but I wouldn't let my daughters watch it.
The post exploded across basketball social media almost immediately. Within hours, discussion of the game itself was being replaced by arguments over Carrington's motives, the meaning of her message, racial bias, Cunningham, and whether a serious social issue was being invoked to distract attention from a reckless play. That was the point where the situation really began slipping away from her. A flagrant foul by itself is something almost every aggressive player risks committing eventually. It gets debated, replayed, maybe punished, and then fans move to the next game. But now people were asking whether Carrington had essentially accused the officials, and perhaps the league behind them, of racial bias without publicly offering any evidence. National media outlets picked up the story. Debate shows began discussing it the following morning. Clips circulated everywhere. And suddenly, almost none of the attention centered on basketball strategy, defensive timing, or even the original contact. The story had turned into a cultural controversy attached directly to Carrington's name. Once that happens, the audience becomes much larger than WNBA fans alone, and the consequences can become much bigger than a suspension or fine, because now employers, sponsors, journalists, and casual viewers are all paying attention to how you handle the fallout.
Paying attention to what DiJonai Carrington did to Sophie Cunningham, it was not a race-based decision. And to call that a white privilege-based foul is to completely undermine the term of white privilege, and to also completely ignore the rules in basketball. You hit her in the head, you drew blood, you didn't connect with the ball at all whatsoever. So to me, it was just very ignorant and to some degree asinine by DiJonai Carrington to suggest that that call was based on white privilege. Have we seen examples of white players make that same foul and get away with it? Yes. Have we seen examples of black players make that same foul and get away with it? Yes. There was no white privilege involved in that specific call. DiJonai, you hit her in the head and you drew blood.
Then the backlash gained a recognizable face when former NFL player and media personality Emmanuel Acho addressed the situation publicly and went after Carrington's post in harsh terms. His argument was straightforward. She had hit Cunningham around the head. Cunningham was bleeding. Carrington never made a legitimate play on the basketball, and therefore framing anything surrounding that specific sequence as white privilege made no sense to him. Acho described the message as extremely ignorant and even used the word asinine while discussing it on camera. Whether people agreed with him or not, that changed the scale of the criticism. This wasn't just an anonymous account firing off angry replies. This was a national sports media personality with a large platform putting Carrington's judgment under a spotlight for millions of viewers. And once a television clip like that begins spreading, it can follow an athlete much longer than the original incident. Carrington then tried to push back, but her response created another layer of controversy instead of shutting the first one down. She replied directly to Acho on X and insisted she had never claimed the officiating decision itself represented white privilege, saying that was his assumption and telling him to use his critical thinking skills while referencing the fact that he studied psychology. She continued by defending her knowledge of the issue, pointing to her Stanford education and saying she wouldn't casually use such language as a rhetorical weapon without having evidence behind what she meant. The problem was that the response seemed to be doing two things at once. On one hand, she said people were wrong to connect the phrase to the foul. On the other, she strongly defended her decision to use the phrase and attacked the person questioning her. Instead of giving people a simple explanation of what the post actually referred to, the exchange became an argument over who understood the situation better. That didn't provide clarity. It made the story even harder to follow, and even some people who initially might have defended Carrington began wondering why a straightforward misunderstanding required such a combative response. The conversation shifted again, this time from the foul in the original post to Carrington's ability to handle criticism when millions of people were watching.
Every single game for the rest of the season counts. And the fact that she let her hate and her ego cost the game for her entire team is so toxic. It goes to show that she has very little respect for her teammates because they all work their absolute asses off. They've all got something to prove. They know that, they started the season with all this hype. They didn't kick it off very strong. And so they have all been working their asses off, coming together, playing patiently. When I say patiently, they've been playing patiently, learning how to actually run the court together. A lot of new pieces. There's been some injuries. There's been people returning from injury. There's been a lot of changes. The fact that they were just on the rise, and as a Fever fan, I can say they were actually schooling us in the first quarter. They came back when we were up 8 points. DiJonai herself was balling out, and she just cost the game for her teammates.
2 days later, Carrington stood in front of reporters before Chicago played Seattle and offered yet another version of events. She described the contact with Cunningham as unfortunate and unintentional, and explained that her timing may have been affected by rust after returning from a foot injury, that at least addressed the basketball portion of the story. But when reporters turned to the social media message, the explanation became vague again. Carrington said she had already spoken with people who had the ability or agency to make the type of change she wanted to see, yet she still did not clearly explain what the original white privilege message referred to, or exactly who those people were. By then, observers had heard multiple variations over only a few days. First there was the foul and the immediate post. Then there was the argument that critics had incorrectly assumed the post was about the foul. Then there was a defense of using the phrase and a public fight with Acho. Finally came the claim that private conversations had already happened with people capable of creating change. Each new explanation seemed to raise another question rather than close the previous one. That is exactly how a bad moment becomes a reputation issue. Reporters notice inconsistencies, fans notice them, sponsors notice them, teams notice them, and once people start feeling as though they can't identify one simple, consistent version of what happened, every new interview becomes another opportunity for the controversy to restart.
She posted white privilege after getting tossed from the game, but says it wasn't about the foul. Can you explain this?
No, I can't. When she tweeted white privilege, she did it so quickly, it was almost as though she had the phone in her pocket after this foul and she got ejected. So, to say she wasn't referring to this play or getting kicked out and saying that the only reason she got kicked out and it got upgraded is because Sophie Cunningham is white is crazy. It was a crazy thing to tweet, maybe crazier than to try to act like it had nothing to do with the play. So I have no idea what she's talking about. I don't think anybody can have any idea what she's talking about. Bizarre.
At the same time, Sophie Cunningham responded in a way that made the contrast between the two players even sharper. When reporters asked her directly about Carrington's message following Indiana's victory, Cunningham kept her answer short and controlled. She said she believed the league was already handling the issue, rejected the idea that race belonged in the discussion, and pointed out that she had experienced a similar situation the previous season when she herself was ejected and believed the punishment was deserved. There was no extended rant, no online argument, and no attempt to turn the moment into something bigger. Cunningham essentially said that flagrant fouls happen, discipline happens, and the league should deal with it. That composure became important because now the public was seeing two very different approaches to pressure. One player was offering brief answers and moving on. The other had spent several days dealing with the consequences of an impulsive post and then giving explanations that people continued interpreting differently. For sponsors and front offices, those moments matter. At some point, the question stops being only about whether the original contact was intentional. It becomes a question about who can navigate intense public scrutiny without creating a second and third problem. Cunningham came out of the exchange appearing calm and settled. Carrington looked as though she was still trying to convince everyone that the original controversy had been misunderstood, while never giving the kind of simple explanation that would make the story disappear.
Oh my God, it's getting real. It is getting very much real for in the field, for them pockets. That's what I like to see. Pockets getting hit hard, bro. Hard. Because somebody need to hold these players accountable for the stupidity they have been putting out. Because it has been a lot of stupidity. And to add even more insult to injuries, thousands of people are calling for Reebok to drop their endorsement for DiJonai Carrington after she attacked Sophie Cunningham. Now this was from earlier this morning.
And now we reach the part that could affect Carrington financially. Because her commercial relationships suddenly became part of the conversation. Reebok had signed Carrington to a multi-year endorsement agreement in April of the previous year and positioned her as an important athlete in the company's push back into basketball, including promotion connected to its basketball footwear relaunch. At the time, the partnership made perfect sense. Carrington was coming off major recognition as most improved player and an all-defensive first-team selection, and she looked positioned to become one of the league's more marketable emerging personalities. But as this controversy spread, angry fans began going directly to Reebok's own social media pages and demanding action against her. Some called on the company to cancel the endorsement immediately, arguing that the combination of the foul, the social media message, and Carrington's responses afterward made her a poor representative for the brand. People sometimes underestimate how important that type of direct pressure can become. Companies pay close attention to their comment sections, brand mentions, sentiment data, and the tone surrounding athletes they pay to represent them. When discussions about a new shoe or marketing campaign are overwhelmed by demands that the featured athlete be dropped, the issue stops being merely annoying publicity. It becomes something executives have to evaluate in financial and reputational terms.
But when black people do some foolishness, they gotta be held accountable just like any other damn race. And I'm telling you right now, she need to be held accountable. So Reebok, stick it to her. Stick it to her. Because what she did was ruined a brand deal like no other. She ain't even all that on the basketball court anyways. Common sense would have told you not to clothesline Sophie Cunningham from hell. Because you want to know why? The backlash you're going to get from that decision will affect your pockets. And I'm so happy that these brands are now seeing what we've been seeing. A whole lot of BS going on from these players. And I'm telling you right now, more players need to lose brand deals when they do stupidity, especially to Caitlin Clark.
Then reports began circulating that Reebok was considering or moving toward ending Carrington's deal altogether, rather than continuing to be attached to an increasingly messy controversy. If those reports are accurate, think about how significant that decision would be from the company's side. Brands don't casually abandon multi-year athlete partnerships. Contracts have been negotiated, campaigns have been planned, marketing materials have been created, production decisions have been made, and real money has already been invested around the person being promoted. Ending that relationship quickly would mean the internal calculation had shifted dramatically. Instead of asking what Carrington could bring to the brand, the company would be asking how much reputational risk comes with staying connected to her. That's the nightmare scenario for any sponsored athlete. Companies want their players generating attention around performance, personality, products, and positive cultural relevance. They don't want every mention of the athlete forcing their own corporate name into a controversy they never intended to join. The longer that association continues during a heated public dispute, the more frequently the sponsor itself becomes part of the headline, and brands are often willing to create distance when they decide the negative attention is beginning to outweigh the value of the partnership.
DiJonai Carrington, after getting thrown out of the game for her ridiculous foul on Sophie Cunningham, went to social media and claimed white privilege. To do that, Emmanuel Acho basically pushed back and said you can't call everything white privilege. It undercuts the idea so many have talked about. And then DiJonai went to X and responded to Emmanuel Acho. He said, I never once claimed that the assessment of the foul was white privilege. That was your assumption. Try exercising your critical thinking skills. No, you studied psych. Furthermore, I'm the last thing from ignorant or asinine when it comes to speaking on white privilege. Do your research on that one. Actually went to school, one of the top universities, might I add, to educate myself on this exact subject. I would never use that term as a rhetorical weapon, knowing the historical and social weight it holds without having the proper evidence to substantiate it. So, in your face, Annual. What I want to know is, then why were you posting white privilege in the locker room immediately after being ejected? What were you randomly sitting in the locker room having just been ejected thinking about when you posted white privilege, and by the way, tagged the Indiana Fever?
The uncomfortable reality is that almost every step that took this situation from a rough night into a potential career-altering problem was avoidable. Flagrant fouls happen, players lose control of their timing, make dangerous contact, get ejected, receive fines or suspensions, apologize when necessary, and then continue playing. A week later, most fans are already focused on something else. That alone isn't what put Carrington in this position. The problem was the chain reaction after the whistle. There was the immediate social media post using a highly charged phrase without explaining it. There was the tag directed at Indiana. There was the smiling reference to the next matchup, which many people interpreted as provocative. There was the aggressive exchange with Acho when a calm clarification could have ended at least part of the debate. Then came the media appearance where the explanation still remained unclear enough to keep everyone asking questions. Every single one of those decisions was optional. Nobody made Carrington publish the first message. Nobody required her to respond to Acho with insults about his critical thinking. Nobody forced her to keep speaking before she had one clear explanation ready. And from a sponsor's perspective, that pattern can become more concerning than the basketball foul itself. Companies don't invest money into athletes because they want to spend their time managing crises. They want ambassadors who can handle attention without turning one difficult moment into an expanding corporate headache. Once executives begin wondering whether the next post or interview could restart the controversy all over again, the relationship becomes much harder to justify.
Hey, the black girl, jail.
You need to go directly to jail for that one. Immediately. No stopping. No excuses. No trying to talk your way out of it. You're done here. You have to leave. Everything is going to be fine. But first, go. Keep going. Straight to jail.
This is assault, right? This is assault. Now let me tell you something. This is assault. She needs to go to jail. Premeditated. Go to jail. Go to jail. She needs to be arrested. Go to jail. I want her in jail. I want her in jail. She should never touch her. Nah, can't do it. All right, we already know the WNBA is in a position right now. You need to make an example of that Don Imus. That Don Imus needs to be made an example of. That Don Imus needs to be made an example of. She needs to go to jail for assaulting Miss Cunningham. She needs to go to jail immediately.
There's another interpretation surrounding this entire story that people keep bringing up, and that's the possibility that competitive jealousy or personal frustration was already simmering beneath the surface. Cunningham has become one of the most discussed personalities in the league this season, receiving constant national coverage, building a huge social media presence, and finding herself at the center of conversations that stretch far beyond what happens during games. Carrington, meanwhile, has had to work much harder for that same level of mainstream attention even while producing at a high level herself. When two players already have a history against each other, and one becomes a constant fixture in the national news cycle, it's easy for ordinary basketball tension to start feeling personal. There's no way to know exactly what was in Carrington's head during that foul, and claiming jealousy definitively caused the contact would go beyond what anyone can prove. But critics look at everything that followed: the immediate post, the defensive reactions, the argument with Acho, the next game message, and the repeated refusal to let the story disappear, and interpret the pattern as frustration spilling into public view. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, it now becomes part of Carrington's reputation because perception matters when sponsors and teams evaluate risk. If Reebok really does terminate the partnership, other companies will notice before considering future endorsement opportunities. Front offices may quietly discuss whether the talent she provides is worth the media attention that could come with bringing her onto a roster. Road crowds now have a fresh reason to target her every time she touches the basketball. Even teammates become affected because they're forced to answer questions about a controversy they didn't create instead of talking about their own performance. That's how one player's decisions can begin touching everyone around her.
Now let's talk about black privilege for a second. Doing something completely wrong and unethical, and instead of taking responsibility, pulls out the race card and acts like a victim. Yeah, that's what we just witnessed here. The sheer lack of accountability on DiJonai's end, that was so intentional. Look at DiJonai staring at Sophie's head the whole time, and look at her reaction after. That's anger. A normal reaction would be to ask if Sophie was okay or immediately apologize. But instead she shoves her. The audacity to go and cry wolf and pull out the fake victim card and scream white privilege, all the while making Sophie Cunningham bleed as a result to her actions. People are tired of everything being blamed on race. I wouldn't be surprised if DiJonai did this in response to Sophie Cunningham coming out vocally in response to protecting women in women's sports. This was not white privilege. Under DiJonai's definition of white privilege, here's some more white privilege. Getting ejected from the game was called consequences to actions, and DiJonai should be thankful that an ejection is all that happened, because she ought to be suspended from the entire league.
Put Carrington's approach next to Cunningham's one more time, and the difference becomes impossible to miss. Cunningham has already been on the wrong side of a flagrant situation. She was ejected, acknowledged that the punishment was deserved, and allowed the moment to end instead of building an entire public battle around it. That's often the difference between one ugly night and a story that threatens to follow someone for months. One player accepted the moment and moved forward. The other continued feeding the controversy with posts, replies, explanations, and new interpretations, until reports began suggesting that a company that had invested real money in her public image no longer believed the relationship was worth the risk. And that may be the biggest lesson in this whole situation. Talent can earn an athlete a contract, an endorsement, and national attention. Composure can determine how long those opportunities last. Nobody can seriously deny Carrington's ability as a basketball player. Her production, defensive reputation, and previous honors are all part of why brands were interested in her in the first place. But this week demonstrated how quickly off-court judgment can become just as important as anything happening between the lines. In the modern sports world, every post can be screenshotted, every interview can become a viral clip, and every attempt at damage control can create another round of headlines if the message isn't clear. Carrington's potential loss of a Reebok partnership wouldn't simply be about one physical foul. It would be about the decisions she made after that foul, when she had repeated chances to slow things down, explain herself cleanly, or simply stop feeding the story. If she doesn't change how she responds the next time controversy arrives, this entire Reebok episode could eventually be remembered not as the final consequence of one bad week, but as the first domino in a much longer chain.